Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Matt Pivots, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
How's it going? Matt Pivots, newish writer, about 2 years in, and writing for Royal Guard Publishing.
All right. And he was on when we did the episode about Royal Guard Publishing as the various Small Press Radio Hour episodes. So you might, if you catch that one, you'll see him on there. And if not, you should go check it out because it was a fun interview. All right. The next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we first found them. And this one's really easy. His publisher said, hey, if we're going to do this episode, I'm bringing him on. He's kind of cool. People will like him. So, I mean, hopefully they were right. Like, people like you, right?
I mean, yeah. So some people read my books and other people read it because they think I'm a cool guy. So, I try to interact with as many people as possible. I'm a outgoing nerd is what I try to shoot for. So,
So the running joke when I was in the Army is be the world's okayest NCO. So now we can do, like, together we can shoot for ambivalence. We could be the world's okayest authors. Like, yeah, it's just okay. I mean, not great, but they're not horrible.
People like the idea, right? They're like, that's a cool idea. I wish you were a little better at writing. So no, just I was joking. We kind of got together, me and a bunch of engineers in college, and then from there it's just been, how many outgoing engineers can I find? And that's my posse. So there are very few of us, it seems like.
It's an explosive good time, honest. All right. So the next part of the the next part of this episode, dear listener, is the religion questions. We do have to ask him. And since he's been on one before, we get to mix it up just a little bit. But Stargate, Lost in Space, or Babylon 5?
So really none. I don't know. So I got not into this too much. I think Stargate, it kind of burned out for me a little bit. I don't know. I was into that the most. Babylon 5, not even close. Just not into any of that really. Just Star Trek is about as far down into the rabbit hole as I get. And then from there, it's an open hole of nothingness, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. So Princess Bride, Edward Scissorhands, or The Time Bandits?
So, Princess Bride is the most quotable movie I think there is. Second to Wedding Crashers. But as far as like the movies that you kind of love is Edward Scissorhands. So I used to watch that with my buddies in college when we were hungover. So definitely one of those movies I think about. I don't know why. It just always was like Scissorhands time, which sounds weird. Sounds a little bit weird, but that's what time it was.
It was a more innocent time, people.
That's right.
And I don't know, for quotable movies, Jurassic Park's right up there because life finds a way, man.
That's true. There's a lot of good ones, and I think that's. Yeah, the Princess Bride is like the OG one, but then
yeah, Have Fun Storming the Castle is kind of iconic. I know people who had Princess Bride inspired weddings. Marriage, it's a holy sacrament.
That would be cool. I think Monty Python's up there too, kind of in that same like level of quotability and
oh, absolutely.
Like so that's I like my movies to be quotable. Like I can't remember my kids' birthdays, but I can remember quotes of every movie ever. So it's just kind of one of those weird
important stuff, right? You're teaching your kids about their priorities.
That's right.
All right. Next we asked you your favorite dinosaur last time, so this time we're gonna mix it up. What's your favorite zoo animal?
So I've always been a fan of the giraffe. I think because of how short I am. I'm only 5'6" or 5'7", but I think giraffes. And then at the zoo near us, you can pay to have the lettuce and you get to feed the giraffes and whatever. And the kids like that a lot. But they're just a majestic creature that just make no sense at all. So, they're pretty awesome. Second place has to be the wolves. The wolf exhibit's awesome because they get the biggest exhibit and for no reason other than that, just they like to run around and just, do wolf things, I guess.
Fair. Wolf things are kind of cool. I dig it. I like the wolves too. All right. And finally, coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Coffee and mocha or some kind of boatloads of creamer that are pretty disgusting to most people.
Okay. All right. So because I know not everyone who is going to listen to this episode will have caught the episode you were on previously. I'm going to ask you this question again because I like the answer. How did you get into writing?
Yeah, pretty crazy. So I started reading this genre, lit RPG. I didn't even know really what it was at the time. I just had He Who Fights with Monster pop up on, you may like this kind of situation. I've been playing a lot of games at the time, and just lots of RPG type stuff, and then a lot of sim stuff too. But anyway, big gamer, and kind of ran out of time as kids came on. So I was like, oh, let me read a book about gaming because I could do that with the lights off. So that was good. And then read Who Fights Monster, loved it. Read Primal Hunter, loved it. Read, I can't remember what was after that. Oh, Defiance of the Fall, loved it. So all the big hits, I just read it like one after another and just devoured those books. And I kind of started thinking like, this is kind of the same, right? All of these people become super powered monster people who kill everybody, and then like a bigger monster comes and then they kill them, and then a bigger monster comes and they kill them. So it's like, what about the other guy who isn't like that strong or whatever? So I went on my engineering background, was like, let me write something that is about a guy who isn't that strong guy. Maybe he's a fat nerdy guy who just likes to like think or whatever. So I had no idea how to write a story or anything like that. And my wife was sitting on the couch, and it was about a year after COVID, so 2021. And I was like, hey, honey, I think I'm going to write a book. And she's like, what would you write a book about? I was like, fine. Just write my, never mind then. She kind of was, but she, to her defense, thinks back on that and says, no, honey, I didn't say that. I said, what would you write a book about? Very calmly. I don't remember it that way, but it was good because now I'm standing here with you and, whatever. But that's what happened. So anyway, I found Royal Road, and I was like, oh, I can write my chapters on here and get feedback, and I can talk to people and whatever. So I watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos on how to write a book because I think that's what you do as I don't know, because I've never learned. So I figured out how to make a plot, how to make world building, how politics work, how to make a map. So do my own maps. There's one there, and you guys can see video. So I did the whole thing. It took me about 6 months of really trying to figure this out. I started writing on Royal Road after that. I couldn't really get past like chapter 3 or 4 without people being like, you're real garbage. You're real bad. And you suck real bad. So it took me like a long time to really get through that. I made a bunch of changes and whatever. And then they stopped saying that. Eventually they kind of started saying like crackheads, like, when's my next chapter? And I would miss a day and people would be angry. And I was like, are you guys messing with me, or do you really like these books? So I kind of just went along with it. And then I got to almost the end of the book and I was like, this is pretty good. And then I wrote a Facebook post, and on the, I can't remember what group that was in, but I asked like, how long can a book be? My book's like 65,000 words. I sent it into a couple publishers, and they were like, it's too short for us. We don't want it. We don't know the genre, whatever. And I was getting like disappointed, and I was like, well, that's okay. And then Marcus reached out to me from Royal Guard and was like, hey, we'll publish your book for you. No problem. And I was like, all right, well, stranger, what's in it for me? What's it look like? Right. So he kind of started talking me through how that looks and what that looks like or whatever. My wife had no idea. She had no idea I was doing all this and writing these stories. I just didn't. The kids would leave at 7:30. My work would start at like 9, and I would just write a chapter a day, right? Like 30 minutes a day, like working out, just kind of write a chapter, then go on with my day, on with my life. So we got to the point where Marcus was like, sign this contract and we'll be your publisher and we'll publish and we'll do this thing. And I was like, okay, well, why not? Let's give it a shot. And I had a lot of questions and, whatever. I looked them up. They're very fair people, and the splits seemed awesome for what it was. So I signed it, and we edited it. We got the cover, we released it, and it was huge. It was a huge success. It came out like top 500 on Kindle. 100 to 200 books a day. It was just blowing up, and I had no idea why. I couldn't explain it to anybody. So about 3 weeks of this goes by, and I was about to get a check for a lot of money, in about a month or two. I was like, I should probably tell my wife. So one day I woke up, we were sleeping. It was Saturday. It was 7 a.m. We were sleeping. The kids weren't up yet. I was like, I gotta tell you something, honey. And she's like, who is it?
It's the equivalent of we need to talk.
Yeah. I was like, no, it's not that. It's nobody. So I wrote a book, and she's like, what? What do you mean? I was like, wait. I wrote a book, and I got it published by a publisher, and it's like selling like 200 copies a day, and it's like it's all over. It's really kind of blown up, and I've sold. At that point, I'd sold like 5,000 copies or something like that, something crazy. And she was like, what does that mean? Like, what? I was like, well, we're gonna get a big check. It'd be awesome. I like, whatever. So yeah. So then from there, like, now it's like, writing a book is not a secret. I mean, it's still a secret to some people. Like, so Matt Pivots is my pen name, and so that's it. So select few know, but most people don't. Most people don't know. Not in like my inner circles and stuff like that. It's just one of those things that I do, and I do it for like relaxation. I still work full time. I have 3 kids. It's just kind of write a chapter a day, just like working out at the gym.
Absolutely. I hear you're a huge UVA fan too, which is, gives you some free time. I saw that like in the background.
Right? Yeah. You can see all my orange and maroon and not the disgusting Virginia colors.
So I don't know, if it was me, I probably would have played that up like, we weren't supposed to talk about that. I might have hinted I was a drug dealer for just a little bit to have some fun. Talked about a missed opportunity, or you could tell her you're moonlighting as a Chippendale dancer. I don't know, something funny.
I mean, Royal Guard could be so many things. It would be a big check. She'd be like, "What the hell?" So yeah, big missed opportunity for sure.
There you go, being all moral and using your like integrity and telling the truth.
There was a lot of so then the funny thing was she told her friends in book club that night, because they had book club that night, which they've still never read. I just
love that they have a book club, because those things are rare these days.
I know it. They've had it for like 6 or 7 years now, and they've never read my books, any of them, which is ridiculous to me. They got to read, but then again, I don't want them to read it, to be honest. I think that would be like standing in front of them all naked. I'd actually almost rather do that instead. But they had their book club that night. And of course, Lisa brings it up. That's like, oh, my husband, here's what he told me this morning. And they're all like, that's like worse than cheating. And I was like, wait a second.
What?
How is it worse? And they're like, you're like this secret guy. Like, you got all these you're like a secret guy that doesn't, I'm like, no, it's not a secret guy. It's just, I just do a thing, and it happens to make a lot of money, which is better than a lot of guys, who are just on like FanDuel or something. Those secret guys are way worse than me. But anyway.
Wait, it's not like you didn't tell her in the beginning, right?
Yes,
she just didn't believe you. That's not your problem.
I told her from the start that I was going to write a book. I don't know what she expected.
What, like, were you a reader before you found Lit RPG?
Yeah, so I always like fantasy books. Ender's Game is my favorite. I never really got into Lord of the Rings necessarily. The names really threw me. I like to kind of get like, I like stories that have a really good character, like a main character, and just like 1 or 2, or like very small cast. There was The Ranger's Apprentice, which was a big one for me. That has like 15 books or something like that, but it's a very like young guy, old mentor type of book, and they just go on adventures. Like that kind of stuff I love. So yeah, I've always been in the fantasy genre for sure. And then Lit RPG was like a puzzle piece that just clicked for me. And then I was like, I feel like I want to fill a kind of void here. So that's what my series, I think, did. My first one, I kind of invented the crafting Lit RPG genre, because it didn't really exist at the time. This was, like I said, about 1.5 years ago. And it was kind of like, hey, what happens if the guy who makes the sword has a book? And everyone's like, that would be really boring. I was like, what though? Because you need to tell that guy's story too. So it's kind of the idea. He solves all the things that's wrong with the settlement, and invents all these crazy things and whatever. So like people like that guy's story. So that was good.
I have found that the one thing people like is they love the everyman story because they could envision it as them.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of the feedback I've gotten on the first series is they all kind of can follow in his tracks, right? Like he comes to a problem, and a lot of the other books, the main character will just slash his way through it. My character can't do that. He's not strong and fast and beefy, right? He's going to think about it. He's got all these different skills, so it's just not the same. And people kind of can think through like, whatever, like I think I said on the last episode, how do you kill a water dragon, right? As a person who doesn't really have even a sword. And there's ways to do that in a magical world. So, it's just a lot of that kind of stuff that was really cool. A lot of the relationship building in there was really good. I kind of relied on a lot of my history with contractors and working with other people and all that kind of stuff to like build a relationship. Like he builds a city, he builds relationships with people, and that's kind of like what all of that's about. He doesn't have to fight. He can just help everybody else kind of thing. So I don't know, it was a little different.
Well, I mean, there's still action, right? Like it's not like there's no action in your series.
Yeah, there's actually almost too much action is what I've heard, and more just like he's just constantly in shenanigans. And he's in the middle of a war. I mean, he gets his, transported to a world where there's just a battle going on between like, cat warriors and werewolves, and humans are at the low part of the food chain, and a lot of people almost didn't like that, but at the same time people are like, oh wow, so he had to just think on his feet and get on it. So like I said, it was just a lot of that, tons of action, and he does eventually get beefier and stronger and be able to fight stuff and whatever, just because Marcus told me to. But it's like you can't be that nerdy MC the whole time. You got to at least get some kind of like benefit. So
if you think about it, like in modernity, like we live a soft life, so it makes sense if you go to a time where you're more physical, like you're going to change your body composition naturally. Exactly. Add to the fact that if you're starting off softer than most, the effects will be dramatic at first because it will be a shock. I mean, it'll slow down eventually. Anybody knows anything about working out, but in that initial drop, it's going to be like, holy crap, nothing fits anymore. And why are my pants falling down to my ankles? Because it does kind of, once it happens all at once and then it slows down and it kind of goes in spurts. So that fits with basic biology of a human too.
Yep. And there's a ramp in the settlement, right? And like half the book is him just huffing and puffing, walking up the ramp, right? So it's like it hits on that.
You're following Lord of the Rings because there was a lot of walking in that book too.
That's right.
I feel like J.R.R. Tolkien was like a recovering infantryman or something because they just kept walking.
They walked a lot, yeah.
They walked a lot, yeah. So is this book the Iron Guild series, which is the first book, let me throw the cover up while we were talking about it. Is this part of a universe where your other series is in as well?
No. So yeah, this was a totally separate. So I got to the finish. I got to the third book of Whisper of Iron, and it reached a conclusion. So it's like a trilogy. It's finalized. There could be more, right? I kind of left the door open a little bit. I don't know if I'll ever revisit, maybe when I'm wiser and older one day, but that one came to a conclusion, and I sat down, I took a little break, and then I sat down, I was like, I'm gonna start over. I'm going to do something different, right? So I wanted to show that I had a little bit of range as an author. So this book came to me while I was watching the History Channel. I was watching Forged in Fire, I think it's called, the one where they like make the dagger.
Will it kill?
So I was like, this would actually be a cool book where he has to, like whatever. So so the idea is like his dad's super like poor, and they're like, it's an elven family, and they're like middle elves, right? So like the high elves are super mean and they just keep everybody down and just work for them. So he's like that, and the dad can like barely afford anything. He ends up in getting in trouble. He protects his little brother from these rich assholes, and then kills the guy by accident, ends up in like magical prison. So like Altheria is the location of most of the book, and it's him in this prison, and all that kind of stuff. It's a multi-race prison, so there's dwarves and elves and humans and giants all mixed into one prison in various sectors. It's just a super cool like thing. And then the only way you're allowed to like exert like aggression is through duels, like sanctioned duels that you can like fight other inmates and stuff like that. So it's just a super cool thing, but totally separate world. I mean, not even the same race. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not a transport book either. I mean, it's just a complete story. So
since since we're talking about the map, you did have so you got some of the characters you show in your art that you have on the book's webpage.
Yep.
Which I think is kind of cool. And you tell about the character, and it's almost like a character sheet.
Yep. You got, so then I had our Royal Guard people kind of design a couple of these guys because I really wanted some of that info. I think this was a character piece. So the last one was about the main character and his struggles and goals and what he does. This is more politics, political, character versus character, friends, allies, backstabbing, all that stuff. So I was like, okay, I need to have the world completely done up, and every one of these pieces, every one of these cities is alive in the book. They all have a part to play in the thing. The dragons, the dwarves, everybody's like a part of this story. And I spent a lot of time thinking through all of that. So, that's why I was like, Jess, I need a lot of this. I think it would be super, because I've spent a lot of time doing this. I was like, I think it'd be cool to have this on the Amazon page too, which I think is a little bit different than what a lot of the authors do.
It's becoming more common now that like Midjourney and some of these AI programs are allowing authors to do kind of this stuff.
Sure.
Obviously, the whole AI art thing is contentious, but if all you're using it is for like character art that goes on a website or whatever, I think that's a middle ground that I don't really care about, especially if it helps people, because not everyone can read and visualize, right? There are certain learning disabilities or whatever where they just can't picture it. So having that available, I think, is helpful. Now, tell me about this map. Did you make this yourself? And if so, how? It's amazing looking.
Yeah, so that is on a program called Incarnate. It's online. It's like $25 for the year, maybe, and that's a commercial license. So I'm allowed to make, artwork that I can sell, use for commercial purposes, whatever. They've got an entire different bunch of packages. A bunch of the dungeon masters that I know use this program as well. That you can get as low as like a street. You can have a street with a bunch of buildings on it. If you wanted to do like a street thing for dungeon mastering, you've got a whole, that's called a world map. There's region maps. There's a city map you can do. There's all kinds of stuff. But anyway, again, going to YouTube, learn how to do a bunch of this stuff. And this one was kind of like a pre-done with the land. It just saves you so much time to get kind of like the outline of it with some of the stuff. So in the bottom right corner, you can actually see the text there. And I have charted by CLLR Spook. So Spook makes these maps for people that are like base maps. They're just basic and don't have any information on them. They're just like the land mass. And he prides himself, or she prides themselves on the fact that they're very correct in the way they do land masses. So you see how the Green Isle kind of looks like it broke away from the main mass with all those little islands on it. There's all these little details that Spook does that I love, and it would take me forever to do something like that. So the base map of all the stuff I use is like that. And then everything else you see, the names, the mountain ranges, where the mountain, the bogs, all that stuff is part of my book. And it all has like characters and where the factions all live, and it's all very,
I really like the sea monsters that are just randomly placed in the water.
Yeah, those are random. Those aren't part of the book.
No, but I mean, if you look back to some of the older map making styles, it was like the here be monsters, right? Like,
yep.
Superstition, whatever. We don't go there because,
yep.
or sometimes if the map maker was lazy, like, I don't know what's over there. I don't really care. I'm just going to say it's monsters. And they won't go and they'll never know.
Yeah. So,
I really like the map. How long did it take you to do that?
That was a while. I mean, it was like, that's the thing, right? So like I get my 30, 45 minutes a day and I would spend it map making. I mean, for a good month solid, probably was just working on various sections of the map. I'd be writing my book on Royal Road and then like kind of change something, or like my character would go on he would walk somewhere. And I was like, that took a long time in the book for him to get there. And it was like that far on the map. So I was like, so you can kind of mess with stuff a little bit, but then, I mean, it just turned out so good. And like I said, I had to put it up there. I got my little map up there. I actually drew a name randomly on Facebook as well when the book came out, and awarded them a map. So I sent a big parchment style to them, signed the corner. I can't remember the guy's name who won it, but he was like super pumped. He's like, I collect all this stuff. This is incredible.
So does Incarnate let you like do point A to point B distancing in their program?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They have grids. They have all kinds of stuff. It's
like I used Fractal Mapper when I wrote my first series. The problem with that is you don't own the final product, so you couldn't use it commercially. But for what I needed, it worked. Once you figured out the scale, because if you don't know what you're doing, you don't incorporate that. And I realized like everything was double scale, so I had to it's not 2 days now, it's 12 days or whatever. Like once I calculated the number of miles right, it was easy. But I like that I could know without having to remember on a chart, like click point A, point B, it's X number of miles. I know the average infantryman can walk at least 12 miles a day full pack, unsupported. on rough terrain, boom, I can figure out exactly how many days it takes to march there.
Yep.
And I really liked that feature. My only problem with that is I know I'll get sucked in with the map making, and then words don't happen, and then publishers get really mad at you. Like, you did promise us this date, you're a little bit late. Oops.
Yep.
So it's cool that you did that, though. Now, do you find yourself adding to it as you write the story, add new things into it?
No, so the end of book 1, I probably could have changed a couple things on there just from what happened in the story. A couple of the factions may have kind of changed alliances or something. But what I actually ended up doing in book 2, I made a dwarven map. So he ends up in one of the cities. So Noldor in the middle there of the mountain range, he ends up. So what I did for the new book was I made just a map of that city. So then it was like, okay, he's going to spend a lot of time here. Where's the mine? Where's all this stuff? Just to give people an idea. And then the funny thing about that city that people didn't know was that it's like surrounded by an ocean and there's rivers that go through it and all this stuff. So they're like, wait a second, the dwarven people are like a seafaring folk? And it's like, well, not really, but they just go over these rivers and stuff like that. So it's one of those things. And then on the bottom right, just like on that map, it says like from visual, blah, blah, blah. So it's like the idea is the person was standing there, saw the city, and then like illustrated it. So it's more of an illustrated map versus that one's a parchment style. But so that's what I did for this book was I made that map instead, which is on Amazon for Infernal Forge Master. So
that is kind of cool though. Like that's one of the things that's the hardest part if you want to try to design the terrain, right? Like if you're going to do an adventure, you kind of have to know where the pieces are. But then it's really easy if you didn't, stay awake in geography class like I didn't because it was an early morning class. You might accidentally have your river going the wrong direction and ignoring gravity, which you can get away with if magic. But
so like, the way I got away with that was you can post your maps on Reddit Incarnate or the map making Reddit or whatever the hell it is, and there's like 100,000 people on there. You post it on there, you won't have a mountain range in the wrong place. I guarantee you that they will rip that thing to shreds. And my map for Whisper of Iron that I had, it was way less, good. So I got a bunch of that was like, the swamp would never be here and blah, blah. And you need to move the snow farther north. And like, what scale is this even? Right? I was like, all right, guys.
That's the running joke is you don't have to ever do research anymore. Just intentionally post something wrong on the internet and people will come out of the woodworks to correct you and do your research for you.
Exactly. So so the map making has been big. I think it's definitely kind
of. I love
it.
It looks, so I grew up like reading books in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, and all the epic fantasies had the maps. Sometimes they would like fold out in the middle or whatever.
Yeah, that's my favorite part.
Yeah, and I love that. Like I'd look at the maps and I'm in my head like planning the battles. Even if it wasn't part of the book, like I'd be like, well, this general's clearly going to invade over here because reasons, and just like I'd have whole adventures from the map.
Yep. Yeah, all my best memories are that kind of stuff. I mean, I didn't play a ton of board games necessarily, but I loved Risk. I got into Warhammer a little bit and then kind of ran out of money. So as a kid, I painted as many little dwarfs as I could, but all that stuff where it's like a map where you can do stuff on it and interact with it is great. I love sim games. Like I used to love Sim City and all the way up, map making and all that kind of stuff are my favorite things anyway. So the thought of being able to just sit at a computer and just make a world from scratch with cities and people and mountains and like it was like I can do that. That's really cool. So I think that part of it was really good, and it forced me to really give my stories some depth, which is really important for my second series. Again, with all the politics and treachery and intrigue, and I really wanted to go like a little extra on this series. It needed a lot of that, which is good, right? So like a character saying, "Oh, do you remember what happened in Porter?" Right? And he's like, "Well, yeah, I know, but the sea mercenaries came out of nowhere," right? You can look at Porter and be like, "Oh, there it is, and there's the mercenaries," right? So it's just like cool. You can have one sentence mean so much more when you have some of that.
Yeah, and it's cool as like you said, you can hang it up on your wall, and it looks like if you didn't know any better, like that's an ancient map of the Americas or something, right? Like it has that real look to it, if like a real archaic ancient map or whatever, right? It just adds like the gravitas to it, I think, rather than just a line sketch or whatever, which I really dig. So obviously the world building is a huge thing here. Did you find that you tended to do the map making and all of the world building stuff before you wrote the book, or do you do it as you go? Because obviously, like, speaking from the mill sci-fi side of things, if I didn't have what the territory, terrain, whatever looks like first, it's very tempting to make every battle look like Thermopylae or the Last Stand at the Alamo, right? Because why not? It's cool. Yeah. But if you have that other stuff done first, at least to my head, then you can make the tactics, either intrigue or whatever, match the landmass and not the landmass match plot needs. I think the story is better that way, no matter what kind of conflict you're talking about. So what's your process in that? Did you do all the world building first, or you kind of do it as you go?
Yeah, I tried to outline, which didn't really fly for me. I've gotten to a point as an author where I kind of just let my characters dictate the story, which is strange, right? Because you have an ending in your head and it doesn't really go there. It goes the right direction, but it's something that always is different than what you expected, which is crazy. But the politics and world building and magic and all that stuff is super important to me because of the depth. So I sit down before I start any new story and I think of all of that stuff. And I kind of do like the 20 questions game with myself and go that deep, right? So there was a post I saw on Facebook one time that was like, if you want to be an author, answer this question. It was like, where do the alligators go? And someone was like, in the sewer. And they're like, why are they in the sewer? And they're like, well, because they had to eat the nuns that lived there. Like, why are the nuns down there? It's like, oh, they can't be exposed to the sun. And then it was like, well, then what are they protecting? Right. And so somebody did that on a Reddit post. And I was like, that's really funny and really awesome. So like, that's the kind of detail that I like to have,
It's a lot of people do if this, then that, and they stop. They think that's good enough. Right. But what you really need to do is if this, then that, then what?
Yep.
And that's the old Socratic method. If you could ask why and what 10 times, if they couldn't answer to that level of granular, can't speak today. If you couldn't answer to that level of detail, then you didn't fully comprehend the idea.
Yep.
And that's essentially what you're doing with your world building, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, it's been really good for me. Anything I do, I'm especially in this world of writing, and there's so many books now out there. I think, when I started in Lit RPG, it was a lot smaller community. It was still a big community, right? There's still a bunch of juggernauts and stuff like that. Matt Denman was still writing and Shirley was and stuff like that. But there wasn't really too many other, big houses. So there was lots of room for people like me to kind of fill in. Since then, I mean, there are a lot of people that were like, oh, wow, this genre has a huge following. Maybe I'll write. And now little guys like me are just getting destroyed by all all these other names that decided Lit RPG was something they wanted to try out, and they bring their 100,000 readers with them. So your books get buried. So I think at this point you've got to be that level of niche where you can really understand who your tribe is, who your people are, who's reading your story. And I'm stuck with crafting and kind of some of that stuff. This series is the same, right? So like Whisper Vine was more crafting and whatever. Enchanted Forge main character is blacksmithing. He makes things, right? So it's kind of that same idea. And his thing is like, I can make something to save the world, which, is good. So like, that's the whole thing. Like, I need to make something to save the world. I need to make an object, make an artifact. And in that regard, it is very Lord of the Rings-ish. It's kind of the opposite. Of course, you're not destroying something to save the world, but still making something to save the world or save your people is the idea. So again, keeping that niche and all that.
I mean, the rings didn't start to destroy the world. They were corrupted and misused, and then you had to destroy them. So you could still have to destroy the thing as the second arc.
Well, and one of my enemies is certainly, one of the enemies is trying to destroy it, and they were, whatever. I won't get into too much of the spoilers, but, the roommate dynamic from the prison is super cool. In fact, I got a lot of my female readers. So on TikTok, I had a lot of ARC readers for Enchanted Forge. And a bunch of women, which was really cool. A lot of my followers on TikTok are women. I don't know if that's just who's on there or whatever, but just I think like 60 to 70% of my followers on there are women. And a lot of them picked up Enchanted Forge and read it for me, and they loved it. And they picked up the second one and whatever. So the funny thing was all of them loved the villain. And it was incredible because he wasn't the villain, right, at first. And then he becomes this bad guy because he's kind of skeezy and whatever, but like the whole book, he's the guy. He's just the funny roommate and, this quirky, weird guy. And they all just fell in love with him. So then in book 2, they of course we're waiting for him to make his appearance, and whatever. I won't say what happens, but I got a lot of messages, and it's just funny. And I was on TikTok, and there's a guy who's really good at dialogue. He has a lot of like 30-second videos on how to do extreme dialogue, and one of his things was like, the closer you are to the villain throughout the story, the more likable he or she has to become. And that really like resonated with me. I was like, I want to make a likable villain, and then also kind of make my main character dip between the lines a little bit too. So that way it's like your main character is a little bit villainy kind of, or he becomes that way because of what happens to him, or he becomes a little bit, of that like beat down, I'm just gonna, screw it, I'm gonna do what I want thing. And then the villain's kind of like a good guy, but then he does bad things, right? It's like so there's a lot of that kind of stuff in these books. It's just, rips your heart out in pieces, and whatever. And you get to love characters, you get to hate characters. Like I wanted to really show some of that in these books. So it took a lot of, again, world building and thinking through all of this stuff before I started writing, which was a little bit different than what I did in the first book.
Okay, and we'll dive more into that book with the characters and whatnot. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Gunnery Sergeant John Doe is frustrated. He didn't join the Space Corps to be shuttled around in a ship. He joined to fight. So far, he has only seen a few skirmishes. He itches for a fight, something he can use to impress his junior Space Marines, as well as use to pick up chicks. Now that he's aboard the USS Big Stick, he hopes things will be different. The Space Federation has defeated their longtime enemy, and has decided another war was just what the people needed. One was intentional, the other was not. Either way, Gunny is excited. Now Gunny and the rest of the ship's crew must fight for their lives against an enemy none of them saw coming. What could possibly go wrong? Dive into the Vacuum Suck Hard Adventures of the USS Big Stick by J.R. Handley and Chris Winder, and find out for yourself.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. I don't actually have anybody that has submitted commercials for Lit RPG, so I just throw random stuff in there because why not? Because I couldn't use that commercial for like, I don't know, somebody's Christian romance novel, right? Like they might get a little offended, so I try to keep that in mind.
Awesome.
All right, so we talked about like your general process in the world building. So what can you tell us about the players, the main characters in the first book? Because obviously that's where everyone's going to start, right? They're going to find this episode whenever they find it, and they're going to start at book 1. So let's assume that that's where they are, so we don't give spoilers by talking about book 2. And what can you tell us about the main characters?
Yeah, so I started with Aravan. He's the main character. Like I said, lowborn elven guy, valley elf is what they're called. They live in the valley that you can see on the map. It's southwest of the capital. It's just a worker town. They mine stuff there. There's a smelter there. So the blacksmith is a big part of it. Pretty much just bringing in stuff, making basic things for the city, and sending them out. They've got a lord of the town who's a complete asshat, and he's got a bunch of sons who are also rampaging the city as also asshats. So the idea of the magic system is it's a pay to play. So it's a gold system. The elves do not get access to magic unless, whatever. The idea was like, why doesn't the blacksmith, who's like the big important guy, production guy, get a class? He just never did. He just never got one unlocked. Just kind of connect, he's, I think, got a gambling problem if you ask me, but either way. So lowborn kid ends up in a prison, like I said, for protecting his little brother, and just ends up out there. So he kind of, so it's called the work camp. So Drakthir is the name of the warden. He's a dragon. He's a spatial dragon, which is from the north. So the northern territories have is where the dragons are from. And so he's a super high level guy. He's a spatial dragon, so he can like kind of read minds and like can kind of do some of that. So he's great for a prison. So yeah, our main character ends up there in this central regional work camp. They call it. They don't call it a prison because that's politically incorrect. It's to the upper class. It's the work camp where they make items and things for very cheap. So the work camp is where all of the basic goods and services come from for the region and whatever. So people hear that he's got a blacksmithing background or history, and they think it's funny, so they put him in with the dwarves, and they're like, "Go ahead, kid, make me a dagger." So it's a whole thing. So elven blacksmithing is very rare in the book. It's mainly dwarves. The dwarven cities have a ore deposit that is very. They make blue steel. So it's like this very high end steel. It pretty much runs the whole world. So there isn't really much use for any other blacksmithing other than just making basic stuff. So that's the idea there. And then kind of some of the other big players. Rurik is the name of the dwarven boss in the blacksmith. So he's a hysterical character. Erevan kind of wants to become classed, and the only way you can become classed is with money. So, and you can't really unlock the magic until you've gotten thousands of gold, which is impossible pretty much for anybody except for rich nobles and whatever. So, kind of gets into some mischief, and he starts dueling people, and it just becomes a whole thing where he, attracts the attention of the Thieves Guild, and there's lots of fun players that kind of come in the prison.
All right, but did the dwarves have Scottish accents? I was hoping familiar with dwarves.
Yeah, so Exo does my audiobook, and they certainly sound decently Scottish. So I think that's the only way to do dwarves. I don't know, but they definitely have that vibe to them. Like I said, I told that story on the last podcast on how I picked Exo and how I made him audition by sending me his dwarves. I was like, that should do. That's nice. So,
wait. If the dwarves are Scottish, does that mean the elves, their natural enemy, would have to be like the English?
So, he didn't do anything with the elves. I mean, so like the main character is an elf, so it was just his normal voice, pretty much a little higher pitched. So like all that's pretty much the same. The dragon has a low pitched voice, obviously, and stuff like that. But no, there wasn't too much difference between the elves and the humans. Humans sound a little dumber. The humans are, the bad guys pretty much in this. They're taking over the world and stuff like that. So, but no, there's not too much difference between the elves and the humans. But the dwarves are definitely something.
So do the other races that you have in there play a factor? I mean, or is it mostly an elf-centric story?
No, yeah, this is big. So the dwarves are kind of secluded, but again, kind of running the world's production of, all the most important things. And then the humans are, so it's really the Thieves Guild, which is they can come in and really manage the mischief at the prison. So they smuggle stuff in all the time. They're constantly doing extra work with the inmates. They're smelting they're melting their stolen goods down and making new things out of it. So they're in and out of the prison all the time. They're very closely located in Illyrial, which is north. So they're a very big part of it. So they were called the Free People. It's just a city of misfits who kind of joined the guild. And then the Elder Council is the kind of Senate of the realm, made up of supposedly all the races, but the humans have kind of started bullying the other races out of there. Hence, they're starting to get some policies throughout the realm that are not great, and then they've become kind of expansionary and whatever. So the idea is there's a hidden artifact there at the prison that he finds out about later on. It's called the Heart of the Forest. It's an elven artifact that got hidden there from long ago. So the humans are trying to kind of infiltrate. The Elder Council wants to destroy it so they can kind of like weaken the elves and take over. So that's the kind of like basic of the plot. So yeah, all of the races interact. It's extremely like ambitious as far as that goes. It's very complex plot, but lots of fun.
So is the map, and I'll throw that back up so people can look at it while I ask, is this the entirety of the realm, or is this just part of the globe?
That's the whole thing. Yeah. So that's the little world if it was wrapped up. So, the only people we really don't hear from too much are the dragons or Drakthir from up north and like the barren lands and up in the mountains there. There's a couple of like bigger inmates in the giant sector that are coming from Ugmog and some of those like troll areas. There's a couple, minotaurs in there and stuff like that. The Green Owls, the druids, they don't really play a part. They're pretty secluded, but yeah, pretty much all the humans across all of that. The only thing that we don't really see is anyone from the tribal steppes and the empty dunes and stuff. So the desert folk aren't really in it until book 2, and they start at book 2. So, but yeah, we've explored pretty much the whole world except the north at the end of 2 books. So yeah, it's a big it's a big world, but we've explored most of it by now. So it's
how many books do you think this is going to be?
It'll be a trilogy. I like the idea of a trilogy. I was never a late game player. Whenever I write or do something, I get burnt out easy. So this is 3 books. That the third book that I'm writing, that I'm going to hopefully release by the end of the year, will be it. It'll be the grand finale. We've set up for it. From book 2 was a really good setup for it. So yeah, so that's where we're at. But no, that's what I think I liked about this. The whole map, all the factions, everybody interacts with everybody in these books, and it's done pretty cool.
So obviously a trilogy, I mean, it's obviously not a Bane trilogy because that would require like 5 to 7 books, but that doesn't mean you're done with the world. So is it potential you would tell other stories in this world? I mean, you'd spend a lot of effort building it, or are you just going to keep building new worlds one after another?
So I don't know. I mean, I think so. I did use this world again. So Royal Guard has an anthology coming out. Don't remember what it's called. It's coming. I think the Kickstarter starts soon. But I was a part of that. It was about 4 or 5 of kind of like the top public authors in Royal Guard, and then 5 or 6 of the top in Timeless Publishing. And I wrote a story in this world, and it actually explains the story of the Heart of the Forest ending up in the prison with the dragon. So it's like 20 or 30 years in the past. So it's completely different characters, but like Rurik, the head of the blacksmith at the prison, his brother is like the guy who he interacts with and stuff. So it just adds a lot of depth to it. And that was fun to do. So I think, like you said, there could be, 100 years in the future, we use this world for something else. And I don't even use the elves. I do it from someone else's view. So there's a lot of different things I think I could do. But my main thing is just to do 3 books and move to the next thing.
Okay. I don't know. I kind of like long series because I get stuck in a world and I just don't want to leave. So is it because you get distracted easily that you like the shorter arcs and then move on to the next and the next and the next?
I think so. I don't know. I think I don't have as much time maybe to write as some of the other authors in the genre. I think the expectations are tough on us too. The expectations are that books come out every 3 months or so. And that's tough for me. I got a full-time job and all the kids and stuff. So like, it's kind of hard. So I can write 3 books a year. So I think that's just a slower pace. And then, I think it also matters too, like how well the book does. This book hasn't done as well as Whisper of Iron had. I could have continued Whisper of Iron. I think I just had this book in my mind and I wanted to try to, evolve, I think, a little bit as an author. But the series I'm doing after this, which I'm taking a break from this one for like a month just to give me a break, because again, this book is very intense and very dramatic. So I think I took a little break to start another just, basic story on Royal Road and just screw around for a couple months, or like probably just a month. So that book is cool. That one could be a long series, I think. But depending on, whatever, but I don't know.
Do they tell you the demographics on Royal Road? Because like I know I published one of my more recent stories on Wattpad at the time, thinking I'd get some free beta reading, win-win, build a little hype. And then I write, like, I don't want to say mature as in like there's like, I'm not talking naughty bit mature, but like combat can be gory, right? Like it's, military themes. And you definitely don't want someone under the appropriate age kind of engaging with that content. And I realized on Wattpad, like everyone's like 13 or 14. I'm like, oh, yep, not here. So is that a thing over there on like Royal Road where you can know that your audience is your target demographic?
You can check boxes, but that doesn't probably stop anybody.
Okay.
No, I don't write really that stuff. Like none of my stuff has too much swearing at all. I don't do any sex scenes, like no, really not even too much gore. Like there's like guy gets like assassinated, right? Like that's like as high level as it goes. And it's like a gruesome death or whatever, but it's not like bad, guts aren't out everywhere and whatever. So yeah, I don't write that stuff. So I don't know. But I know Royal Road doesn't really give you that.
So since we're talking about this, what would you say the age range would be like if you're doing a movie rating or whatever rating you feel comfortable with for the audience? Because we got some people that listen with their kids or listen and then screen books for their kids. So what would you tell to the parents that might be listening?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a little bit more like mature themes in the Iron Guild series, right? Like with the idea of people getting assassinated and murdered and stuff like that. So that's a little bit more, but there's not swearing or whatever. I would think like 14, 15-year-olds would probably be fine. My Whisper of Iron series, my roommate's kid read those, and he was 9 at the time, so and he loved them. So, I think my first series is definitely more like young adult. And some even of the feedback from people is like, oh, you went really young adult on this. And I was like, I don't think on purpose. I think I just wasn't that good of an author yet. And I wasn't like, it seemed simple and whatever. I think maybe a little bit more than this series just because it wasn't as good yet. But the first series is definitely more young adult. This one could be too. I mean, it's not anything bad. I think anybody could really read this story. So.
Okay. So do you know, like you mentioned that you let the characters sort of, you follow the muse or whatever, chase the mind squirrels, however you want to refer to it when you write. So do you have an idea then when you start this series where it was going to end?
Not really. Like I said, it was pretty crazy. The characters just, I had an idea. It's funny. I look at the outline and I'm like, this isn't even close to what happened. So that would probably bother a lot of people. But then I don't know. You just kind of do whatever and you just find your way. I actually I rewrote the ending to Enchanted Forge 3 times because I wasn't happy with where it went and the characters let me down. So, just the way it went. I actually used some of what I threw away the first time in book 2 because, like, I think what ended up happening was we got through this part of the end of Enchanted Forge on Royal Road, and people were like, and then you just kept going, and we were all kind of like, huh, well, I mean, that could have been the end, and then, but that wasn't a good ending. So I think that was what I realized. Like, it wasn't really a great ending and I felt like I had to keep going to like, yeah, well, there. And then it wasn't it. So I rewrote the whole ending, saved some of what I had, and then redid that. And then it turned out a lot better. The ending was awesome. It was pretty cool. The last line of the story was like something from before in the story, and it's super eerie, and it was really good. I was pretty proud of myself for that one. But it's a cool one. Even my wife liked the book, which is tough, I think.
So does your wife actually read them?
She read, yeah, she hasn't finished Whisper of Iron. That don't, readers don't listen to that because still read it. But no, Enchanted Forge she loved. She hasn't done the second one yet, Infernal Forge Master, but she's waiting for the audiobook. So actually we just finished it last week and it'll be released, however long it takes to go through the quality channels. But
and then that can be forever. I mean, sometimes it's not unheard of. The Amazon is set on some for 6 months.
Yeah,
after it was proofed and perfect.
Yeah, and I had Enchanted Forge done before Christmas, and it didn't release until like end of January or February or something, just because just we waited for a dual release of audio and Kindle and nothing. So yeah, I mean, I think that's it. But yeah, no, I think I have it in my head where the third one's going to go. It has to go to a certain spot for the ending, but how he gets there, I just kind of let him plot it out and things happen and we react to it. The other thing that I do in my writing is I have them set in 3 acts. All of my books, it's one of those things. I don't know why I do it. It just does. So at the end of each act, there's an interlude, and the interlude is always from the perspective of the villain. And I find that really gives like a super cool, like special insight into the villain. Again, you want to be close to them. You want to learn who they are. You want to hear their thoughts, you see their feelings and all that kind of stuff. They're not just some bad guy. So each one of my interludes always comes from some kind of like bad guy's perspective. So I do that in all my writing and some cool ones in this last book for sure.
So obviously, like, you've got the villain character. What do you think makes them either so likable or love to hate them? Kind of like, what do you think is the reason the readers react so strongly to the villain?
Well, I made him so he was like the bright light in the darkness, right? So when this all started, so obviously it's funny because I can't even say too much because it's kind of almost a spoiler who the villain even is, but it's not really, but whatever. So, at the end of the day, like, it's just one of those things that I have a lot of twists and turns in the first book and the second book. So you'll be reading and something will happen. You're like, holy crap. Right. So like that happens like 4 or 5 times. Like it's just a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's just a fun, it's just, I tried to be a lot different than lit RPG stuff. Right. So like lit RPG, both of my series, what I tried to do is fix what I wasn't enjoying about the genre. I love the genre. I love 98% of the genre. There's 2%. One was the first series. No one ever talks about the other guy, which I wanted to do. And then the second thing is like every fight, the good guy wins. And it's very straight line. It's very rare to find a series that the character takes any deviation from the main line. He becomes stronger. He thinks about what he's going to do. He fights the bad guy. He beats the bad guy. He thinks about the next thing he's going to do. It just seems to be a lot of the genre. And there's obviously that's not 100% correct to say that. There's a lot of people that do incredible books and stuff. But I wanted something with a little more intrigue and a little bit more, forks in the road and a couple more like, whoa, crazy that just happened moments. And I really pushed myself to try to do that in this series. And maybe that's why it hasn't sold as well, right? I mean, it's not really your standard lit RPG necessarily. Now it has stats, it has character pages, it has all the different magic stuff that he has, what skills he's got a, whatever. But it's almost like light RPG, right? It's like, it's a little lighter on that side of it and more on the story and the other stuff.
So the lit RPG has a reputation as being somewhat of a popcorn summer read kind of thing.
Right.
And there's room for that. Like as the world gets crazier and crazier, sometimes like, you need a break from the world. So that kind of stuff makes sense. Like, this is going to air in September with everything going on with the Russia, Ukraine, potentially Australia and China and Taiwan. Like everything in the world is getting a little topsy-turvy. And suddenly people are like, World War III might happen. I don't know if I want to read mill sci-fi. Let me have the popcorn space opera, right? Yeah. So it makes sense to me that there's a part of the market that wants that escapism. So you mentioned that this one has character sheets. Like, do the characters in the novel know that those character sheets exist? Like they're kind of seeing the game interface, or is it happening behind the scenes and they don't know it?
Yeah, so they know it. I was thinking about making it where they don't, but yeah, so he can access, whatever. So it's like an internal where he just knows, but he does know. And it has his, strength, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, so it has all that stuff. It's got his skills. His skills level up. He chooses a path eventually. So it does get very in depth. I think, again, some of the ARC readers that I had were these females who had never read the genre at all. And they were like, a lot of their feedback was like, I don't really like the lit RPG. They're like, you didn't even need it. Like, it was just a great book. And then you threw these stats in there and I was kind of like, why is this here? And then the second book, I think they all read it again because they liked the first one. And they all were like, okay, as it gets more in depth and like as his skills mature and as he gets more different like options for all these things, they're like, now it makes sense. Right. So like that they got it eventually, but that was like, welcome to the RPG. This is how it works. So I was like, welcome to any video game. That's how it works, right? You're just like, I don't know, +2 strength. I don't freaking know. Right. And then eventually you get to a point where you have to pay attention. So that's how I think these books are too.
What engine did you use to operate behind the scenes? Is there a formal, like, I'm kind of using a clone of insert RPG here, or is it just kind of a wing and a prayer and you've got a scientific mind so you can kind of make it make sense?
Yeah, no, it's just wing and a prayer. All my stuff kind of is just a big spreadsheet.
You think mathematically if you're an engineer, so it kind of makes sense that you wouldn't have a problem with that. Yeah. And I know another lit RPG author, Melissa McShane, we interviewed, like her and her husband's a tech guy, so like he makes the engine just because he likes to make the math model, so she has hers work. And then I've seen others where they either make a direct clone of insert video game, we don't want to get people sued, or tabletop RPG, or they wing it and they hope it makes sense at the end. So there's kind of, I don't think there's any right way. If the story's good enough, it doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah, and it has the visual of some of that stuff, right? Like to make a to make it easier for people to just get it. You know, there's a little bit of tabletop gaming on there on this one. But yeah, for the most part, all of it's just coming along, and there's, you know, mana per second burns, and there's all these other things. And then like while he's in there doing the things and using the skills, you got to remember to doesn't get this very long, and it's all part of the story. And then you go back at like a chapter going like, oh crap, I forgot he can only blah blah blah. So then, you know, your road readers get all pissed off and whatever. So yeah, no, all of it comes from up here, and we just kind of go with it. My newer series is going to be a real-time simulator replica. So, you know, Age of Empires deathmatch kind of situation. It's going to be pretty fun. That one won't be as serious as this series, but same thing though. You got to like be the computer in your mind with like all the resources, all the different workers you got running around, everything. Like you gotta do all that stuff, or it won't make sense. If it doesn't make sense to you, it certainly won't make sense to the readers.
So obviously there are people that come at RPGs from different entry points. For some people, it was like Dungeons and Dragons Pathfinder. For other people, it was, I don't know, Elder Scrolls, Morrowind, you know, Skyrim, whatever, Final Fantasy. And then for some people, it was the choose your own adventure ones they had, which was like Lone Wolf, where like, you know, you have a +2 sword. Are you going to attack or are you going to use your arrows or, you know, whatever? Like you could make the choices in the combat that mattered. Obviously, the problem with that is it's a RPG for one, and you can cheat because I did as a kid a lot. But like, when you're doing the story in your head, what kind of model are you using? Because I guess it comes back to where your first exposure to RPGs was.
Yeah, I was big Baldur's Gate fan. So
I remember that.
Yeah, so a lot of my stuff comes from that direction. I almost think that, like, you know, as your characters in the book interact with other characters, you know, I can almost even imagine like the choices where you A, B, and C, D and stuff. So yeah, that's the direction I've gone with it. And then the funny thing is, I think, you know, like Aravin's roommates, one of them works for the you know, Enchanters Guild, right? So like he can make magical items. So he gives them like a +1 like blood stopping cloth, right? And he's just like, oh, here I was practicing on this. This is supposed to be +5, but I screwed it up. So here you can have it, right? So like just stupid stuff like that you just get these magical items that somebody made though. Like, this comes from somebody. This isn't just a store that you can just click through that some guy that you right click on has a bunch of magical items. Like it came from that guy, right? And his other roommate makes potions. She's an alchemist, right? So like, here's a +2 strength potion. Don't use it all up because this is for the army, but here, right? So like all of that stuff. There's just lots of little things like that I think I tried to like pull from the game or from the gaming world and explain where those things come from. Because I think that's really is important to me. It's like the background part of a lot of that stuff.
And you could even like pulling from real world, like slave labor has happened. Like the Germans use it to man their war machine. The Imperial Japanese did. Other empires have historically done that. So there's lots of room to come back and tell another war story kind of thing. And it's all about, you know, trying to sabotage the potions and the enchanted items or whatever you have, like to hurt the war effort. Like there's all kinds of room with all of this stuff being built by inmates to have shenanigans later too.
Yeah, and the dwarves are making all these you know, swords all of a sudden. Like a huge order of bucklers comes in, right? Because they've got to make these big tower shields because there's a rebellion up in the north, so they got to make pretty much riot gear for the trolls, and like there's all this stuff, and it's just a cool, like I said, I think a pretty cool take on it. I think this series, it's been tough to get out there because, like you said, I think people like escapism a little bit more, and I did the exact opposite of that. I put you in a prison. So like Marcus warned me, Beauregard warned me. They're like, you write a book about a prison, you're not going to sell that well, right? Like it's probably not going to sell that well unless you get it out there that it's a good book. And obviously the reviews have been great. I mean, 4.4 stars on Amazon, like 300 reviews or something. So people really do like it when they pick it up. It's just dark, you know, it's darker. You're stuck in a prison for a lot of it. So, you know, it's one of those things that like, there's a lot of elements in there that I think are super cool and nobody's really done yet. It's just, you know, thanks for having me on here to talk about this kind of stuff. It's pretty cool to be able to talk about some of the things that I'm trying to move forward in the genre a little bit. And force people to think about this stuff.
So if you could, would you live in this world?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'd live in either one of my worlds, to be honest. I think both of them are tough.
Yeah, I mean, you're not quite as bad as like a Warhammer 40K level of shenanigans and insanity, but I mean, that prison doesn't sound fun.
I know. I'll tell you, it's not bad, but then like when you screw up, whew, forget it. And then like I said, the dueling aspect of it was really fun too. We didn't really touch on that too much, but like,
Oh, let's do that real quick. Talk about that before we
yeah.
wrap
So
this up.
the idea was Drakthir, the dragon warden, comes in. There's a lot of bloodshed. There's a lot of people ganging up on each other, beating each other up, and killing each other, whatever. So the book starts with a prologue where they are interviewing Drakthir. The Elder Council's all there. He stomps his way in and is like, "Here's what I propose." He wants a dueling arena. He can use mind magic against these inmates, but he chooses not to. He would like for all aggression to be put on the stage. So his idea and his race's idea is by combat, right? So they're a combat race. So he's like, I think that works well. You're taking away all of these people's rights. You're taking away their pride. Let them have their pride, right? Like if you want to fight somebody, it's because of something pride related when you're in prison. Let them have their moment in the sun, out in the open field. What's better than battling another person in the open field? And then the whole prison's there watching, like a gladiatorial effect to give them something to do. So it's a win-win, right? So he has this kind of like proposal and whatever. 10 years later, the Thieves Guild's gotten in there. It's a good way for people to get eliminated, right? Like, put him in a duel and then, turn off the safety precautions or whatever. But anyway, so like, that's the idea. So like, if you get challenged, so then Erevan gets there. And of course, the new person gets challenged to a duel by somebody else. So the first day he gets challenged to a duel by this other guy who got his ass kicked when he got there. So that's how it starts. And then, he gets his ass completely kicked. So, sorry for the spoiler, but, of course he had to. So the duel is cool. And they change. Sometimes they're hand to hand. Sometimes they're allowed weapons. Sometimes it's like a group battle. But there's clerics that, go along. And if you challenge someone to a duel, they come and officially like, you've been challenged to a duel. How do you like to respond? So it's a whole thing. But it's another cool element of the book that's just like, again, just really different and just adds a whole nother level of intrigue.
What happens if someone says no to the duel?
So you're allowed to, but the idea is like, good luck with that. You'll just keep getting challenged by bigger and badder inmates, and you should have just probably said yes to the first one. Is the idea? It's the scuttlebutt around the inmates, and you can get challenged by other races. Obviously the first duel is a elf versus elf. He gets challenged by an elf in his block, but you can eventually get challenged by other races. And the idea is you have to be classed. So Erevan isn't classed when he gets there, so it has to be an unclassed inmate that challenges him. So someone without access to magic. So that's the idea, but you know how that goes.
Now, do you touch on some of the darker themes that exist around the idea of prison? Because obviously, if you know anything about real world prisons, lots of dark stuff happens. Do you touch on that in this book, or is it not quite there?
No. So I try to eliminate a lot of that with the idea that no one's going to like it's not like a happy prison, but right. But like everybody knows, like you can't, like you have a level 48 spatial dragon, like you can't do anything like that. Like there's no shenanigans. Like he'll know, and B, like, no, you can't, because he has a torture chamber where he can put you in the aether cage, which is your mind gets kind of locked in a cage and you don't know how long you're there and whatever, and it makes people insane or whatever. So there's certainly threats to not to behave yourself and follow the rules. So I tried to eliminate it with that, and also magic or whatever, you can just ignore whatever. So no, it's not like super dark. I would say like for a prison book, it's not like you're gonna have to cry yourself to sleep or whatever.
So do we get any Shawshank Redemption level of I'm tired, boss?
Yeah, it kind of has some Shawshank vibes a little bit. I don't know. I definitely love that movie and had a lot of different thoughts about that when I was writing it. So it has that. Like I said, I think the biggest thing is like Erevan and the dwarves, Erevan and his roommate, Erevan and the Thieves Guild. There's just so many cool interactions, and it's a lot of really cool dialogue, and I really tried to bring the world alive with some cool stuff going on.
So before we wrap this up, was there anything about the Iron Guild series or specifically book 1, which I don't know if you guys caught that, but book 1 is titled Enchanted Forge, and it's a lit RPG adventure. And it's book 1 of the Iron Guild series. But is there anything about that book that we didn't talk about you think that the listeners need to know before we wrap this episode up?
No, I mean, like I said, I think with book 2 coming out, so you've got about 200,000 words to read. Book 3 will be about similar length. Goal will be done by the end of the year. And so that'll probably wrap it up for that series for now. I could definitely see something coming off as a spin-off world or something like that, depending. And no, it's audiobooks coming out soon. So Whisper of Iron got bundled as a trilogy. This will be too eventually. So, I want people to read the stories and stuff like that. But if you're like that person that's tight on the pennies right now, then that's okay. And by the end of the year, I think you'll have all 3. So we will see.
So when you do the omnibus edition, do you throw in new content, like a new short story or something, or is it just the bundled books once?
It's just the bundled, yeah. That way you get 1 credit for all the stories. It won't be like right away, right? Like, I mean, we're gonna let the sales kind of play out, and then usually it's a couple months after that, so it won't be till next year that the omnibus will come out anyway. So people listening to this, hopefully you like what you've heard and want to pick it up. And it is available on Kindle Unlimited too, and all that stuff too. So that should help, but. Yeah, so eventually this will get bundled and stuff like that as well. I think that's the direction of it. With Whisper of Iron, Whisper of Iron's done really well as a bundle. There's a lot of people picking that story up, which is really cool. I think I had like 1,800 audiobooks alone in the U.S. and I was like, that's crazy. It's like one of those things.
Well done,
incredible. And I've met a lot of cool people on Facebook and TikTok, and I still have that feeling that people are like messing with me when they're like, "Oh, I'm a huge fan." I'm like, it still doesn't feel real sometimes, and it's just been cool to give these stories to people and interact with people and stuff. So,
okay, this is a part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, so do your part. It really does make a difference. New or established author, book 1 or book 12, it doesn't matter. Your reviews do help train the algorithms, the kind of readers that might like the book. And it does help because of that with sales. So you're helping the author, and by helping the author in a way that doesn't cost you money by leaving the review, you can make it so they'll write more, because, if the number of sales tells them whether it's popular or not and whether it's worth their time. So if you want that to happen, do your part, and it really does matter. And with that, Matt, where can they find you on the wild interwebs?
Yes, I have a Facebook. I'm very active on there. People can message me all the time. I'm not one of those people that you message and I won't respond. I'll probably respond right away. I love talking to my readers, love talking to my fans. I'm on TikTok and just kind of ramble on there about day to day. I make announcements on there, talk about how hard it is to be a writer and a dad and a working man. I've got a Patreon. It is somewhat being used, not really, but I think as a new series kind of starts to come out, it would be on there. And then everything's on Amazon for your viewing and purchasing pleasure.
All right. And you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree /Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTube, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. More importantly, we have our email at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. And if you want to have the shenanigans, Madam Stabby Stabs over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and email. So send the shenanigans her way. She's here for it. We have our website over there on Spotify.com. Trust me, the address is a bunch of gobbledygook, but if you go to the Linktree, click the website, you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. Every penny helps. These episodes are not free to produce, and we appreciate your patronage. Speaking of, you could support the show more directly by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until their hair turns brown. See, I hadn't done the hair yet, people. And speaking of coffee brand coffee, if you go to the link below and use the code podcast grunts, you get 10% off. It's an American company. You're helping support American workers. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, and you get delicious coffee. So I am still, because I bought a couple bags at once, going through my s'mores coffee. I'm digging it. A little bit of plain creamer. It's delicious. It's probably a little bit decadent, but, a few Hail Marys can fix that, right? We're good. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerdy culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thanks for coming on, Matt. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to have you come back to talk about your other series at, far enough in the future that it doesn't bore people.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. That was fun.
All right. And with that, I'm going to hit the end.